Not only those who he characterizes here. It's interesting how he does this. He characterizes without giving a whole lot. He doesn't flesh it out and he says, this is what I mean by that. You have to figure that out by reading the context of the epistle and the other letters and really the New Testament. Vain, profane, and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. Oppositions. That's the translation of a word that sounds like this, antithesis. Okay? It's the opposite. Oppositions of science, knowledge, falsely so called. Well, we could stop here and say a lot of things. Let me just summarize a few thoughts. This would include theories from science or knowledge that conflict with the faith and with Scripture. Do you hear that? I know science is the authority of this corrupt generation in which we live and has been for 150 years or so, and in the minds of some further than that. But I'm talking about culturally, it has expanded and grown to where science is the religion of our day in this culture. And to say anything contrary to science is to contradict what they say is knowledge. And what God says is, no, to say anything contradictory to the faith is science falsely so called. Erroneously called science. Erroneously called knowledge. If teaching of any kind is at odds with the faith, it is not true knowledge. It is mere human speculation. It is limited by the mind of limited man. And that's one of the reasons why you see the continual change in the philosophical world, the psychological world, even in the science world. And that which is true knowledge in the science world stays the same. It's not changing and shifting. And so we remember the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 3, let God be true and every man a liar. Regardless of the ingenuity, regardless of the cleverness of the thoughts or supposed greatness of the mind, it doesn't matter how many initials are behind the name or which Ivy League institution or English institution or ancient institution they got their degrees from. And we seem to be very impressed with that. I use the word seemed. Can I correct that? Here's what do you call full disclosure. I am impressed with that. Because I know it takes an awful lot of work to get those degrees. Isn't that true? I mean, those aren't just wholesale, okay, just send us $10, $50, $100, $1,000, we'll write you a degree. Whoever got those degrees put a whole lot of work into those degrees, but that doesn't make it knowledge that's true. And so I'm not belittling knowledge. I'm not belittling study and the work that's involved in the study. I mean, let's, flip it over a page. Study to show thyself. Study, that's work. That's effort. To show thyself approved unto God, a workman. A workman? There's work involved. That doesn't need to be ashamed. Need not be ashamed. Rightly dividing the word of truth. Knowledge. True knowledge. A mind at odds with God is a corrupt mind. And Paul may be alluding when he says here, oppositions of science or knowledge falsely so called, he may be alluding to doctrinal error that had already crept into the church. He writes about it in the second letter, 2 Timothy chapter 2, where he says we read verse 16, shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness, and their word will eat, as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who concerning the truth have erred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrow the faith of some. Isn't that interesting? Already at this early stage in the history of the New Testament church, their errant theology had crept in. And I don't know much about that doctrinal error there, except this is the conclusion Paul gives, is they say that the resurrection is past already. And I would say to you, whatever teaching, by the way, there are those teachings that exist today who say that very thing. And if you come across that teaching, you know it's not of God. It's not true knowledge. It doesn't matter how logical the reasoning may seem by those who present it. And I assure you that those who present error are not stupid. Let me take that back. In fact, it depends on what you mean by stupid. Did you know that there's a translation, a modern translation, that I do not recommend, that actually translates, when it says profane and vain babblings, they translate it stupid. They put the word stupid in there. And that's a modern translation that I wouldn't use. I would never recommend it to you because it has some gross errors in it. So there's a sense in which we could say, yeah, they are stupid, but there's a sense in which we could say, no, they're not, as the natural mind goes. And that's why it's dangerous. Because you can be pulled in to the error. There were those in Paul's day, as there are in our day, even in churches, who question every established truth of the faith that we are charged to keep and guard. There have been times in my ministry life where I felt like just throwing my hands up. I think, you can't say anything, hardly, without there being a rebuttal. Even within the church. And some of the things that we say as teachers and preachers may need to be rebutted. But if it's rebutted, it needs to be rebutted by the truth. Not just by intellectual sparring. What does Paul say? How are we supposed to deal with these folks? We're to avoid them. Avoiding, he says. Turn away from them. Shun them. That's what the word means. Avoid them. I'm quoting someone else who said it this way. Don't waste your time in subtle arguments. Listen rather to the unequivocal voice of God than to the subtle disputations of over-clever minds. Numerous times in my own life when I've been studying a certain subject, whatever the subject is, and I'm at my wit's end trying to figure out what is the truth. Because I've read so many different opinions about it. And then I come back and I say, all right, clear the desk. Here's the book that matters. Teach me. Spirit of God, teach me. And it is amazing how often it's happened that all the tension in me has just dissipated. And I've come to see, there's the truth right there. Yeah, but can you defend it against Dr. So-and-so? Maybe, maybe not. But that is what God is saying. And I'm anchoring myself on that. That's what I'm keeping.